Just like me, Dr. Baskerville was fired for his work on masculinity and the family. He's the real deal. If you want to understand how feminism was used as a honey trap against men like me and you, how the welfare state was the original deep state, and practical strategies that men can use to fight back, then absorb everything this man has to say. The interview is packed with useful information. Subscribe now, watch to the end, and enjoy. I'm joined today by Dr. Stephen Baskerville to discuss one of his upcoming books. He is, in my opinion, one of the bravest and best writers on the topics of masculinity and family working today. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So, tell me a bit about the new book that you've got coming out soon, and how does it relate to your previous work?
Well, my previous work has been largely on the politics of sexuality, the politics of the sexual revolution. My first book on these topics was a book specifically on the divorce industry. The child custody industry destroys parents, especially fathers, and families, and constitutional rights, and entire societies. And that book has done very well. It's called Taken into Custody. But the more I studied that, the more I studied these issues, the more I realized that the divorce industry and the child custody industry, the attack on fathers in those courts, is just part of a much larger phenomenon of the sexual revolution. So I wrote a book on the sexual revolution. It's called The New Politics of Sex in 2017, and that looked at a whole variety of aspects of the sexual revolution. It went far beyond the standard boilerplate conservatives. A number of books had come out from conservative commentators, and they were all kind of the same. They were quite good in many ways. But they were kind of a standard conservative party line. And of course, there were numerous books put out by the left saying that the sexual revolution is a good thing, and then these books by the right saying it's a bad thing. But I tried to push the envelope a bit and show specifically why, what the consequences are. And because my interest is in politics, I was specifically interested in showing how the sexual revolution, the larger impact of the sexual revolution on the state, on government power, and to show how it massively, divorce in particular, but all of the aspects of the sexual revolution, massively expanded government power, not only in the United States, but throughout the Anglophone world and throughout the Western world, especially. So that was very important, because I was trying to show that this wasn't these issues of sexuality, gender, if you like, fatherhood, men. They weren't marginal issues. They were things that were part of the mainstream, and they were destroying the rights of individuals. The traditional constitutional rights of the English-speaking countries, especially the common law countries, but others as well. And this was something everybody needed to be concerned about, not just men and fathers. So that's what I've done so far. The new book is really more limited in some ways. It focuses on the politics of the last 3.5 years or so in the United States specifically. And the reason for that is because of what I call the coup d'etat in the United States. Basically, the ascension of the far left, the extreme left, to political power in the United States, especially the national government of the U.S., being seized by a junta, really, a junta of far left, extreme left adolescents. And in ways that makes them very, very difficult to dislodge, and in ways that allow them to enact very reckless, dangerous policies, including the destruction of, again, traditional rights, traditional liberties, civil liberties, and the reckless immigration policies, the COVID policies were very much their work, plus the vaccines and shutdowns, plus I argue the war in Ukraine is another manifestation of this. All of these things have taken place. The lawfare operations that are going on against American citizens, especially the supporters of Donald Trump, but others as well. And this wholesale loss of freedom and this highly authoritarian government that's taken control of the United States, but other countries as well, in the last, roughly since early 2020.
probably no more important topics to be writing on today. Thank you for your work. And I especially like the point that the sexual revolution has resulted in a massive expansion of the state's reach and power. And of course, one reason for that is that the weaker the family, the stronger the state has to be to mop up the mess and to compensate. So we're in this strange situation where feminism talked about smashing the patriarchy, but never really smashed it at all. All it's done is replace the domestic patriarchal provider figure of the father with the super patriarch of the state in the form of Big Daddy. And single mothers have joined the kind of government harem. Now, it seems like to reverse some of the damage here and repair it, we need to find ways of undermining the welfare state. But that seems like a very daunting task. How could it be done?
Well, it's a good point. I'll kind of break that down into several components. First of all, you're absolutely right. Feminist revolution, sexual revolution, and the breakdown of the family has not resulted in equality between men and women. It's not resulted in this utopia of, men and women living in complete so-called gender equality. And it hasn't smashed the patriarchy in many ways. You're right. It's created the patriarchal state, or we created the patriarchal state, almost going back to the days of monarchy, with women effectively marrying the state. The state fills the role traditionally held by the father, especially providing for the mother and children, and the protecting the mother and children. So it's the state has filled that role. So yes, what you say about the weakening of the family strengthens the state, it's very true. But especially the weakening of the father strengthens the state, because the state takes the role that the father has. And this is no accident. I mean, this is one of the things I fault conservative organizations for. They tell us about how the breakdown of the family is so awful and terrible, and they go on and on about this. But they treat it as some kind of impersonal cultural phenomenon, like it's just something that comes out of nowhere without any explanation. But no, the state knows very well, or consciously or unconsciously, the state and its functionaries, its politicians, the various people that staff it, they know very well that the fathers and families are their opponents, their enemies, and the impediments to their absolute power. And if they can weaken families, and especially fathers, they can they can fill the vacuum, they can take control. And so it's, the sexual revolution is a political revolution, just like the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution. In that sense, it's an attempt to take control of the state machinery, and it's succeeding. Now, you mentioned, for example, the welfare state. In many ways, this is what began it. And in my new book, I give a central role to this. Now, people are going to say, what's the welfare state have to do with it? The left is taking control. The left is creating this authoritarian state. They're doing these horrible things. They're killing massive numbers of people through vaccines and through the Ukraine war. And you want to go back to the welfare state. Well, the welfare state was the original deep state. Think about it. If you define the deep state as government functionaries taking control of the private lives of innocent people, non-criminal people, then the welfare state began it. And I should say this specifically the American welfare state. For your British and European listeners, it's a different thing. Much more middle-class phenomenon in Europe and Britain. But for Americans, the welfare state was basically poor-released, and it created an underclass of the impoverished, single parents, as you say, realized fathers, fatherless children, and the attendant social pathologies, social ills, crime, substance abuse, homelessness, you name it. They're all associated with single-parent homes. And this was the creation of the welfare state. And it started very much in the American low-class, low-income communities, especially minority community. Above all, I believe, in the African-American community. And that was the first population that they took control of through the welfare system. And from that, they've been moving out from there to take control of the middle class, of other minority groups, of the white majority and others. So the welfare state was, that was where the single mother empire really began.
Now, for anyone thinking that all sounds true, but what can we do about it? How can people concerned weaken the welfare state and strengthen the family again? What do you think some of the first steps should be? Where should the emphasis be placed?
Well, I do think the welfare state needs to be taken on.
If you're a married Christian man and your love life isn't exactly what you want it to be, then click on the link in the description below to book a free tactical call to find out exactly the steps to fix it. Guaranteed.
It's a very dangerous behemoth, a leviathan, machinery for a number of reasons. And it needs to be taken on. I should say it was the American Republicans, it was their number one priority, was abolishing the welfare state. It was, at least getting the welfare state under control and preferably abolishing it up until the 1990s. And it was also the liberals, the left wing, the Democratic Party also wanted to pull the welfare state. Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a moderate Democrat, urged in 1965 that the welfare state and the fatherless homes that it was breeding was just asking for trouble. That trouble was already materializing in the Black community, and it was going to spread to the white community. And sure enough, that's exactly what's come to pass. So conservative Republicans wanted to abolish the welfare state. Liberal Democrats wanted to at least get the welfare state under control. Everybody agreed that the welfare state was demeaning. Giving handouts to the poor was demeaning. Even the Marxists hated the welfare state. They talked about welfarism. They thought it was buying off the proletariat, buying off the working class, and dampening their revolutionary fervor. And it was, giving bread and circuses and money to the poor, and therefore they wouldn't mount the revolution that the Marxists wanted. So everybody hated the welfare state, and everybody wanted to get rid of it. Why didn't we get rid of it? I can tell you, and this is one of the important parts of my book, the pivotal parts of my book, because the feminists had in the meantime taken control of the welfare state, and they had turned it from a necessary evil into a positive good. They were the ones that made the welfare state a virtue in itself. Up until that point, the welfare state had been a necessary evil of giving handouts to the poor and so forth. Everyone agreed, well, we got to replace it, but until then, it's got to stay. No, the feminists, they changed it, because what the welfare state did was it created a class, or a new class of functionaries, social workers, we call them, feminist female functionaries for the most part. Many of them have from the start been indoctrinated, been inculcated with the ideals of radical feminism. If you look back at the origins of the American welfare state in the early 20th century, had Jane Addams and others, radical feminism, anarchism, communism were part of it from the very beginning. Not the dominant part, but definitely a part of it. And it grew over the years. Just as background, I should say that, for many years, poor relief charity in America and in Britain and other places had been dominated by Christian women. It had been dominated by women who were driven by a sense of Christian calling. They'd been supported financially by their husbands. They'd gone out, they'd engaged in relief of the poor, but they had also, at the same time, crucially, they had enforced Christian sexual morality. Yes, they gave material sustenance to the poor. Here's money, here's food, you need this. But remember what God says about, having children out of wedlock. So that was not incidental. That was part of it. That was an important part of it, because it was the way of keeping poverty under control and even abolishing poverty. Okay? Those women, those private Christian volunteer women, were replaced by the professional social worker. And they had exactly the opposite incentive. They had an incentive to make single parenthood as bad as possible, to make poverty as bad as possible. Like any bureaucrats, like any functionaries, they had a financial incentive to create the very problem they were supposed to be solving. And in this case, that meant poverty and poor children and fatherless children and single mother homes, which feminist ideology was simultaneously extolling as a good thing. By the 1990s, these feminists were writing books about how wonderful single motherhood was. It's a great thing, single motherhood. You don't need a father. You don't need a husband. Raise your children without them. Okay. So this is what made the welfare state and generally single motherhood a good thing. And this is what cowed the Republicans and the conservatives and, of course, the Democrats, liberals. They didn't want to take on welfare reform anymore because they knew it would bring down the wrath of the feminists upon them. And this is precisely what.
So, joining the dots up then, it seems like if promiscuity in opposition to traditional Christian morality has been promoted as a way of weakening the family, then one way for people to take on the welfare state would be to strengthen the family via a return to traditional sexual morality, because nothing affects the family more than sex does, and nothing affects society more than the family does, is what the Catholic Catechism calls the original social cell. So there's a case for weaponized chastity here for anybody who wants to fight back against this.
Absolutely, yes, very true. Traditional sexual morality, you don't have sex except in wedlock. This is the fault, I have to say, of the men's groups. They don't realize this. The fathers' rights groups, some they extol, or at least they're indifferent to out of wedlock sex. I think they're hurting themselves by that. I think they should be taking the moral high ground and pushing that. That's a hard case to make, but it's one that I think needs to be made. Traditional morality. And the other thing that is missed, the point that is missed, and it's missed by conservatives, it's missed by fathers' rights groups, missed certainly by the left, they wouldn't ignore, is the inseparability of marriage and fatherhood. I argue that marriage is basically the main practical purpose of marriage is fatherhood. It allows children to have fathers. That's the difference between a sperm donor and father. Motherhood is biologically determined. Lifelong biological bond is automatic between the mother and the child. Fatherhood requires social construction. And that's what marriage does. Marriage creates that bond. It creates a father. And if you look in the English law, the English common law, go back to Lord Mansfield's rule. It's a very important law in England in the 18th century and really existed even before that. It says that the father of a child is the man who is married to the mother. And the Napoleonic Code has a similar kind of similar provision in it. It's what Engels attacked in his book on the family, sex, and marriage. Because it established that bond between marriage and father. But the family groups, the tradition, the family values groups that talk about the importance of marriage, talk about the importance of the family, they don't go into this because they're afraid of the feminists. They know it'll bring their wrath down the parliament. And ironically, the fathers groups don't go into this. And I think that's a mistake. Because the groups like MGTOW, men going their own way, renounce marriage, renounce women, renounce relationships, some of them. I understand them. I think they've got the facts on their side. I understand completely where they're coming from. Their position is factually unassailable. But I think they're making a mistake by simply writing off marriage and the family, because marriage in particular is the source of strength. And I think the fathers are, in a strong position if they mobilized and took moral high ground to become the real champions of traditional marriage and the family. It's no accident. It's the feminists are making all this time to destroy this. It's sad when you see the fathers groups kind of, mimicking the feminists, using their jargon, talking about sexism and discrimination and second-class citizen. I think they should take the moral high ground. That's just my opinion.
I think that's a really overlooked point about the way in which the men's groups that will shun marriage and family, but also advocate to their members that men engage in unmarried sex still. That's so important, because what are you really rejecting about the sexual revolution unless you are weaponizing chastity to try to turn things back? You're going with the flow of it then, because in many ways it was built on the foundation of unmarried sex and contraception. Those were the two major pillars of the sexual revolution, practically speaking anyway. So taking it on means shunning both of those two things.
Yeah, very much so. I think it does. Again, I can understand that a lot of men, it's difficult to see that. They want to just renounce, marriage, women, families. But of course, they're not, again, I'm not going to preach to them or feel superior, because, what happens to them in the divorce courts is just inhuman. But I think they are renouncing a part of themselves. I mean, it's a human desire to have a home, to have a family, I think, and to have to reproduce your kind, and to reproduce your kind not just any old way, not like animals do, but in a way that builds the civilization and contributes to the long-term stability and prosperity and freedom of your children, your descendants, your children, grandchildren, and everyone. So I think it's tough, but I think men that's the path forward. So I think to answer your question, I think really the ball is in the court of the men, and I also believe in some ways the ball is in the court of the African American men in the United States. I'm making this point. I think they can have enormous moral leverage if they organize themselves about this. They were the first victims, after all, in many ways, of the welfare system. It was the black male. The black male to this day is the most degraded member of American society. Years after the Civil Rights Movement, after the Black Power movement, after a black president, after the Rodney King and George Floyd, and all of decades and decades, the black male and the black communities, as a result, are still in a condition of degradation. And the left exploits this, and the right ignores it. And this is one of the biggest failings of the right. If you look at conservative politicos, they seem to have nothing but contempt and even loathing for black men, especially young black men. And I don't think black men are going to ever be equal in our society until they stand up and renounce the left, make it very clear that the left does not speak for them, that they're not going to take refuge behind this phony charge of racism everywhere, racist this and racist that. The left is exploiting them for this, but also has to add that the right does not speak for them either, that the right has also dropped the ball. They've not championed the black family and the black male the way they should have. So, I think, and yet everyone uses the black man because they say, well, the black sort of the victims of everything. Well, okay. If that's the truth, then the black male men are the ones that I think have potential to leverage, moral leverage to stand up and take the leadership. I think that would be one sector of society that is clearly underestimating its own potential.
That's a really profound insight, and not many people are talking about that. There was a British social scientist called Jeff Dench who was writing a few decades ago, largely ignored by academia. And he argued that the black man was basically the canary in the coal mine of feminism. And you mentioned earlier that this is where we first really saw the damage of feminism in African American communities. It's where the welfare state first gained power. And Dench said that the black ghetto was like a microcosm of what Western society would later become. He noted that the erosion of responsible male roles and the virtual institutionalization of female independence has proceeded alongside a massive collapse in community integrity and morale. Now, it's not surprising that his work got ignored by academia. That's not the kind of thing that academia likes to hear. But you're saying the same thing, that there's lots of moral leverage here because it was the first place the damage was done, and this is where the damage needs to start being undone too.
Very much so, yes. I must look up that writer because I've used exactly the same metaphor, the canary in the mine shaft. It's very true. Yes, I couldn't agree more. I think others have pointed this out also. I can't emphasize this enough. I think a large part of the power of the left today in America and the weakness of the right is the inability to recognize this and capitalize on this. That's the right-wing politicos, about race. They give you this boilerplate thing about how, American society is not racist, black people are not discriminated against, they're not this, not that, the police are not brutal. So this standard thing, affirmative action is pointless, all of which is true, but it's also a little bit beside the point, because the left uses race. This is very interesting. The left uses race because of its moral authority, but they often use race as a way of pushing through radical sexual ideology like feminism. For example, you look at Black Lives Matter, this supposedly militant violent black organization that's arose the last couple of years. Well, it was founded and it is run by feminists, by radical feminists entirely. And if you look at their manifesto, it pushes radical sexual ideology. It wants to destroy the patriarchal family. In other words, it is exactly the things that further degrade the black male and further degrade the black community. And this is being called Black Lives Matter, and it's being pushed by radical feminists. And so, they're doing this using race. It's a flanking operation, subterfuge in many ways, for pushing through further radical sexual and feminist politics. And I might add, you quite say this explicitly, but it's worth adding. If you go back to the years of the welfare state, and you look at the similar measures that are being proposed today by the Biden administration to expand it, and I'm talking about the welfare handouts, the AFDC it was called in those days, or TANF it's called now. Basically, the welfare payments, the public housing system, the food stamps, the income supports, the tax credits, all of these things benefited black women, low-income women, single mothers, all of them. They did not benefit black men in any way. They hurt black men. They made black men expendable, disposable, superfluous. And this is exactly true of what's being proposed by the Biden administration. It's just going to further marginalize black men, and with them, the black community. Black men have got to wake up, and low-income men, or men generally, have got to wake up and see what's being done.
I think the number one thing we need to wake up to is that feminist ideology promoted promiscuity, male and female, to undermine the family and the male authority that goes with it. The Colombian philosopher Don Colacho said that sexual promiscuity is the tip that society pays its slaves. And in many ways, feminism got men by the balls as a result of that. You've described it as a honey trap, the greatest honey trap in history. And it's a chilling way to think of it, but I think a very accurate way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very much what it is, even if no one planned it that way. That's what it has become. Feminism has become a system of temptresses luring men into this trap, and they're bringing the trap on them. It is a tyranny. Interestingly enough, I have a whole section of connecting this to the criminal justice system, which needs to be looked at because black men, of course, disproportionately exist in the prison population of America. And they, it is often presumed by many people, even on the right, that black men are criminals or semi-criminals, or just waiting to become criminals. But if you look at what black men are incarcerated for, it's not violent crime for the most part. For the most part, it's non-payment of child support. So, in other words, it's a new form of slavery. They haven't paid; they've become slaves to this matriarchy, this single mother matriarchy. And the main enforcement mechanism is the child support system, where you take away a man's children. Again, this began with welfare, and it's by the family courts. I know it's not as bad in Britain as it is in the United States, but it's terrible in Canada as well, where the men are criminalized, incarcerated without trial if they don't pay their child support, horrendous levels. And basically, the child support is a latter-day system of slavery. This state within a state, you're paying this single mother matriarch. And by the way, if you want to see it, just push the envelope a little further. If you want to look at people like Kamala Harris, this prosecutor that's going after Donald Trump, now several different prosecutors that are going after Donald Trump and his supporters with these completely bogus, patently, obviously bogus prosecutions, ludicrous prosecutions that anybody can see make absolutely no sense whatsoever. They're clearly drummed up for no other reason than to prevent Trump from becoming president again, and to punish his supporters. Well, these prosecutors that conduct these lawfare operations, people talk about them as if they're corrupt left-wing prosecutors funded by George Soros. Well, that's true, they are. But where do they start? Where are they trained? Where do they begin? When do they go rogue? Well, they don't go rogue. They're rogue. They're trained to be rogue from the very beginning. Most of them cut their teeth on child support prosecutions. They prosecute fathers, mostly low-income black men with piddling little incomes, for child support violation. this is where they learn to do it. And if you look at these hearings, it's real assembly line justice. I mean, the men just queue up one after another. The hearings, each case lasts about a minute or two. The man is jailed without any trial. And these prosecutors, all they do is read out some number, completely meaningless numbers, to a judge. The judge then throws the men in jail. By the way, the judge and the prosecutor, their salaries are both paid for by child support. So they have a vested interest in this. And, this is unbelievable that this kind of thing can go on in America. And then we turn around and wonder why these crooked prosecutors are available in huge numbers to prosecute people like Donald Trump and his supporters for completely bogus charges. Well, they've been prosecuting law-abiding citizens for decades on equally bogus charges. So Americans, we have tolerated this kind of corruption too long, and now it's coming back to haunt us. It's preying because they assumed it would never hurt us. It's just a bunch of young black guys, Hispanic guys, whatever. We assumed it would never, and now it is. It's exactly what's happening. It is coming back to haunt us. As Martin Luther King said, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. You can't come down unjustly on some of your population and expect it not to spread to the rest of the population. Frederick Douglass, the great anti-slavery campaigner back in the 19th century, said something very similar. He said, the white man's liberty is marked off in the same grave as the black man's because of the slavery system. And very true.
Yeah, the way that judicial power is weaponized against men is becoming blindingly obvious to pretty much everybody. And men are sitting around wanting cultural change to happen. They want to bring it about somehow, but it feels like they're fighting a fog that has infected everything and almost made it so they can't even see the way out. But Daniel Amneas has said that the linchpin in the feminist program is mother custody following divorce. Pull that pin and the feminist structure collapses. So this one thing is holding everything up. And if we can remove that, then the whole thing comes crashing down. Do you think that is the most important pin to pull? Mother custody following divorce? And if so, why?
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, it's a fascinating idea. It's definitely worth a good investment of our thoughts and effort to see the implications of it. Amneas was a Shakespeare scholar. He was a brilliant man. He wrote several provocative books, one of which is called The Case for Father Custody. And he basically he went through the feminist, quotes the feminists exhaustively, enormous amounts of research. And he came up with this formula. He argued that if you one thing that will pull the plug on the matriarchy, on the feminist program, is the divorce system and the welfare system, the divorce system, but especially the custody system that came out of both of them. The automatic custody of mothers. In other words, the power of a mother to basically throw the father out of the family without any cause. This is what it is. What it amounts to. And this happened under welfare without any real debate. Nobody really paid much attention to it. Well, I think that there were some conservatives that did, but eventually they gave up. And then the same phenomenon spread massively through the divorce system to the middle class. What was once a low-income phenomenon is now a mainstream norm. Amneas argued that this was the main problem. This ability of mothers to control, as he put it, the reproductive system, and to remove the father. And I've been thinking about that for at least 20 years since I first read about it. As I wrote my own books, and I quoted in the Times. And the more I think about it, as I see what's going on today, as I see how these issues have worked their way into the mainstream and the impact that they've had, I'm coming to the conclusion that he's largely put his finger on. It's a very provocative. It would be one I would argue can't invent the panacea, but I've never read any. I've never come up with any ability. I've never been able to refute it myself, and I've never seen anybody else refute, including I've never seen any fathers' rights groups refute it. I've never seen any feminists refute it. I've never seen anybody from any part of the spectrum, including myself, able to refute it. And the more I think about it, it's a fascinating theme, and it would have a huge impact. Yes, if there's one thing that has done more to corrupt, well, not only to break down the founding, but to corrupt the legal system, to undermine the social and moral fabric of society, it is the system of forcibly breaking up families and separating fathers from their children. And that's, started with welfare and then the divorce system. And the basic evil in both of them is the system of custody, of child custody. It's it destroys families. It tears apart, loving relationships, breaks hearts. But it also destroys the legal system. It is the one measure that the no-fault divorce system, which the Americans came up with in the 60s and 70s. Actually, the feminists came up with it back in the 40s, but they finally got it enacted in California in 69, and from there on in other American states, and then from there on very rapidly throughout the Western world, throughout Europe, and then today they're trying to push it on the global South, is the system of no-fault divorce, coupled with a system of automatic mother custody. And it's just not challenged. It's responsible for all of it, frankly. It's certainly responsible for the breakdown of family. And, the family values groups, the pro-family groups, the focus on the family and all the rest, they completely ignore it. They have nothing to say about it whatsoever. In fact, they defend it sometimes, astoundingly. So, obviously they talk about abortion. They get into all kinds of issues, school choice, or all kinds of things, euthanasia. But they're supposedly concerned with the family, and they ignore the one most direct, most central thing that destroys families, and that's the divorce system, especially the no-fault divorce system. So, it's astounding that these groups ignore this and people still give them money. So it does that, and certainly destroys families. But it also does much more than that. It destroys people's constitutional rights, civil rights, and common law rights. Flagrantly, it is the only system of law that I know of so far, because I'm sure it will end, where innocent people can be summoned to court and be subject to legal edicts and legal punishments. In other words, legally innocent people completely minding their own business, completely legally unimpeachable, guilty of no legal transgression, no legal infraction, and be hauled into a court and issued with orders, edicts, injunctions, controlling their lives, effectively punishing things that are perfectly lethal without having committed any crime or legal tort, and punishing them basically for things that are completely legal. If it's not the only thing, it's the first, and it's the one from which everything else spreads. So it is a measure that has simultaneously destroyed the family and destroyed the common law system of Anglo-American constitutional justice. It's just astounding, and there's virtually no debate going on about it whatsoever. So, I think that there's a lot to be said for that. I think urgently.
Yeah, when you think about what a radical is, even etymologically, someone who goes to the root, that's exactly what they've done by changing the law in those areas, because it's how you can get maximum impact, maximum disorder. So people who are ignoring those two things, mother custody following divorce and no-fault divorce, they aren't addressing the root of the issue. The two of them need to go together. It's been on the right wing a talking point for a while, but recently people have gone silent about it. The French counter-revolutionary Louis de Bonald wrote that on the indissolubility or dissolubility of the conjugal tie depends the fate of the family, religion, and the state. So he saw it right back during the French Revolution and wrote his book on divorce, talking about the catastrophic effects this would have on the family, on male authority, and on social stability generally. So we need to go back to some of those early concerns and really revisit the importance of them.
Absolutely, yes. It's a classic work that needs to be rediscovered. Louis de Bonald book on divorce. It was published around 1808, I think, right after the French Revolution. really still during the French Revolution in some ways. And as you say, he saw the role of the family. He anticipated things which nowadays we take for granted, or we hear a lot talking points. But he really saw it very clearly. And what he also saw, I think, was even especially here, was he saw that the radical ideology that was behind the French Revolution and all of its destruction was also basically the same ideology that is behind the move for easing divorce. So he saw these, the revolution in the state and the revolution in the family and all of the dire consequences which came from both of them as intimately connected. It was a very, very important insight. And it's worth mentioning here that some people have observed this, that all during the major revolutions of Western history, divorce in some form plays a role, and radical feminism begins to make its voice heard. Usually, it's been in the past. It's been a marginal voice. The feminists like Wollstonecraft during the French Revolution were not mainstream figures. They were marginal. During the Bolshevik Revolution, they were also marginal, and eventually they were sidelined by Lenin. First they were influential. Lenin and then more so Stalin saw that they were causing trouble and they were interfering with the revolution, so they basically sidelined them and silenced them. But it is significant that sexual radicalism always accompanies the big revolutions. If you go back in time, even the English Revolution of the 1640s, if you look at Milton's famous divorce tracts that he wrote, he of course was himself a radical Puritan and a regicide, or defender of the regicide of Charles I. And he was the first to raise the issue of divorce in a series of tracts. And there was radical sexuality being practiced by some of the sects, radical religious sects in the English Revolution. I'm told, I haven't researched it, but then during the American Revolution, there were hints of pushes for divorce, according to Barbara Whitehead's book. And in the colonies, the American colonies during the English Revolution, there was some push for apparently some movement toward liberalizing divorce. So it is interesting that this has gone on as a subtext in radical politics now for centuries. But now, and I could say something similar to the Chinese Revolution, but now in the 20th century, in the post-war years, it has become mainstream. Sexual radicalism moved out of the shadows, out of the margins of radicalism, and they're now enjoying their day in the sun. It's no coincidence. I believe, in many ways, as I've written books about revolutions and radical history, and I believe in many ways what we're seeing today is the culmination of modern history. The sexual radicalism has been gradually growing within liberalism, within the left, in Marxism, within Jacobinism, Marxism, and now it is standing on its own 2 feet. And in some ways, it is the logical culmination of modern history, the history of the last half millennium or so. We need to see it in that context. And we are about, we talk from annals of laws of historical harmony. We get confronted as I think as our top priority. I think the replacement of traditional social and economic discontents. Marxism was concerned with social and economic issues. I believe that has been overtaken now by sexual issues. It was the vanguard of the left. The replacement of Marxism with feminism is the most important ideological change in our time. I think conservatives are burying their head in the sand. They talk a lot about cultural Marxism, but I believe that phrase is being used nowadays by conservatives to avoid dealing with the sexual radicalism and the feminism. And they want to fight the wars of yesteryear. They want to say, "Oh, feminism, yeah, it's a problem. It's just Marxism. It's just Marxism all over again." After all, we won the Cold War. We won the fight against the Soviet Union. We won that war. So it makes to call this war, we call this Marxism and communism, makes them feel like, well, we're going to win this war just as easily as we won the last one. I don't think it looks that way. I think that sexual radicalism, radical feminism, is a new form of radicalism in itself that needs to be confronted on its own terms directly, or it's gonna overtake us. You can see it with as it transmogrifies into homosexualism and transgenderism. Let's just say not homosexuality alone, but homosexuality as a political ideology. And you can see that. I think the roots of that are in radical feminism. I think that controlling the feminists, I think you'll have the roots, the homosexualism and the transgenderism will atrophy, will wither on the vine.
That's a point that not many people are talking about. Timothy Gordon wrote a book called The Case for Patriarchy, where he goes through the church fathers, various encyclical documents, and points out that you don't get any real compatibility between Christianity and feminism at any stage of the history of the church. And giving a full-blooded defense of Christian doctrine also means giving a full-blooded counterattack against feminism. And he points out that feminism was the original gender dysphoria. And the idea that it's the original gender dysphoria is similar to what you're saying here, because if we want to disarm the sexual radicals, then actually focusing on transgenderists or homosexualists, that's very much a side issue. You get sidetracked by that. And that's where most of the so-called countercultural right really have their focus. But they're looking in the wrong place, aren't they?
I believe so, yes. Sadly, it's kind of the nature of our politics these days. Those are the things that fill the coffers of the organization. That's good for fundraising. You find the latest, the latest outrage from the left. You make a big splash about that, and you take on the battle, fill your coffers with contributions. But I think in the long run, it's a formula for defeat. It's a formula for gradual defeat, ratcheting everything, ever further left. I mean, I agree that the transgenderism has gotten to extreme proportions. Mutilating children, children's bodies physically is horrifying. I don't want to play that down, but I don't think that I complain about the right. Also, they don't make these distinctions. I mean, they don't. They put the mutilation of children's bodies in the name of transgenderism on the same moral plane as women's sports or women's washrooms, which are actually, I'm sorry, they're just not that important. Basically, the squabble over women's sports is a sectarian squabble within feminism. Conservatives should not be taking sides in that. It's not that important. I'm all for women's sports. I think it's great. It's good for women to encourage women to be healthy and so forth. But to treat it like it's something on the same moral or plane or the same importance as what the feminists are doing elsewhere, or what the transgenderists are now doing to children.
Yeah, I think the sad fact is that one of the reasons that so-called conservatives aren't willing to do the hard work here is because many of them deep down actually are very sympathetic to feminism on the one hand, or on the other hand, they're simply afraid to do it. It's cowardice that means they won't take this on. St. Thomas Aquinas described effeminacy as the reluctance to do what is right due to being sidetracked by pleasure or put off by pain, basically. And the prospect of the pain involved, possibly being cancelled, for example, or losing various funding sources or donors by actually giving feminism both barrels, for many of these conservative groups, is too much of a deterrent.
I think it's very true. And I think one explanation is the way that feminism of a sort has wangled its way into the conservative institutions. The Republican Party in the United States is now, controlled by feminists of a sort, right-wing feminists, as the Democrats almost. The churches, of course, the American churches are full of this. Again, they talk about, the churches being infiltrated with Marxism. Well, yeah, they are to some extent, but Marxist churches are, left-wing churches. But the right-wing churches, the conservative churches, are infiltrated much more by feminism than by Marx. Conservatives are afraid of their own women in many ways. They talk about manhood. They extol, the virtues of manhood. Josh Hawley, the American Center, just wrote another book of on manhood. But they won't challenge the feminists. They'll challenge them on a few issues like abortion or other issues, more so than abortion. Well, what they won't do is challenge them on the things I've been talking about here, like the welfare state, the custody system, the things that really matter. You hear Josh Hawley's American Center. He says nothing but good things about single motherhood. There's the other one, J.D. Vance. There's another one. These are MAGA Republicans, politicians who are more or less supportive of Trump and that area, but they're, I think this is a serious blind spot even for them. And I deny some of them are capable. Some of them are, and then men are capable of great physical courage. Physical courage, men who would stare down a tank, men who would, physically, they don't lack courage in the least. But morally, I think it's not physical courage men need nowadays, it's moral courage. And a lot of these politicians, that's what they lack, is the moral courage.
Now, if men don't find the moral courage required to fight back in the areas that you've been outlining, to what extent do you think they're actually encouraging, participating in their own emasculation and failing in their duties to protect their own children?
Oh, I absolutely. I think they are. And I think they have to take the initiative themselves. One of those things in my book, the book is not about just these issues. It's also about many other failings of American politics, really the elimination of true citizenship. As Americans and others, Bush do the same, paying people, especially lawyers or law firms, lobbyists, lawyers, law firms, paying people to do the duties of citizenship for. We pay people, we pay lawyers to go to court, but we also pay lawyers to speak out, in our political system. And the lawyers have everything. It's kind of like they say to us, if you go in a courtroom with a lawyer, what does he say to you? And he says, "Be quiet, let me do the talking." Well, that's what the lawyers and lobbying firms are doing in our politics, and we're paying them to do this. And they have an incentive. Whenever you pay people to do something, they have a vested interest in perpetuating the problems they're supposed to be solving. So yes, I think men need to take back their citizenship. We all need to take back our citizenship from the professionals, the professional political class, the lawyers, the lobbyists, the pressure groups, and so forth. And I think that means foremost men. And when I say citizens, I kind of have a conception of the citizen. Not that there's no role for women, but the citizen as a household, the citizen as a married property holder, a man who has a covenanted relationship with a woman. A man who has children, both a covenants and a contractual relationship, a sacred relationship with a woman, but also a legal relationship, a relationship that is consecrated by this church and by the state, and with children that are recognized to be his by that same contract and covenant. And so the citizenship is a household entity, and this is what it was originally. Go back to the days of the 40-shilling freehold. 40-shilling freehold was there because it was assumed that you needed property to be a proper citizen. Otherwise, you just sold your citizenship to the highest bidder. And that idea of the citizen as a household unit, with the father and the mother united, and the children firmly, under their authority, and they have to work together with other citizens who also are in a covenant relationship, preferably in an institution like a church. And I talk a lot about churches as being the outlets for citizen voices, and churches have a lot to answer for in their failure to do this. The voices of citizens. You cannot replace churches with lobbying groups. You cannot replace churches with law firms and lawyers. That's what we've done. That's what we did in the 60s and after. We created the so-called public interest law firms. They were quickly imitated in Britain. They were quickly imitated by the right. They basically surrogate citizens who we pay to do our citizenship forms. And, they don't solve it. They just perpetuate the problems and make them work. Well, the citizen have to come back and reclaim their citizenship. But I think that means men, foremost. Men are the ones that have to take the initiative. Men, preferably united with women, again, in sacred covenant, contractual relationship with a woman and a family. But, it's the men that are going to be blamed when it doesn't.
Yeah, patriarchy means literally rule by fathers, but there's been a lot of abdication of authority, running away from responsibility. Jeff Dench, we mentioned earlier, described the sexual revolution as being in large part the male stampede from responsibility, taking that honey trap angle that you mentioned earlier, trying to get the pleasure of sex, but not the duties and responsibilities of raising your children. Some men were only too happy to agree to that deal, and it resulted in their emasculation. Augustus, as Rome began to decay, asked how the Commonwealth could possibly be preserved unless men married and had children and raised them in their families. And in a way, we're facing the same question today, aren't we? And what you have suggested there about the importance of the married father, the household owner, as the ideal citizen, reminded me of that point. This is really what the future of society depends on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one thing I left out there, and my definition of the citizen, which someone should write an entire book about, is the concept of the citizen in arms. You know, I said that the citizen should be a really functional, a truly free, complete functional citizen is a married man with a family, with property. He is also the bearer of arms. He bears arms in defense of his home and in defense of his country. And, that's an old idea, not only, again, an Anglo-American thought. It goes back to the American Revolution. It was very much part of the American Constitution, the English Revolution. It was very much part of that. In the 1689 and before that, in the 1640s, it was part of that. It goes back to the Italian Renaissance. Again, citizen in arms. And of course, that means men. Sorry, but feminists know this, by the way. You can find feminist literature where they will acknowledge that the traditional meaning of citizen was just a male, householder who bore arms. And there's been a lot of consequences to losing that ideal also. One of the very serious one is the citizen army has been replaced by the bureaucratic army. Soldiers have become functionaries, especially the upper levels, the generals and they become functionaries, and they become, the American military, I critically point out in my book, has become a giant welfare state. The upper level command is appointed by people for their political wokeness, their political correctness, not for their military experience men, of course, are deserting the military in droves. Women are the largest area of recruiting in the military. They consciously go after women. Many of the women are recruited not as soldiers, but as clerks and especially as lawyers. The military is full of lawyers nowadays. It's full of lawyers and functionaries. And, this needs to be reclaimed. People, when I say we should bring back a draft, I'm reluctant to say that because, you can't just draft men and turn them into functionaries. They've got to become real citizen soldiers. I think that has to be reclaimed as well, that ideal, because, look at the debacles that we've gotten into, especially in the United States in the last few decades, in Ukraine now, in Iraq, because of this, because the military command, I think, largely is run by functionaries, run by bureaucrats, and not by true soldiers. And you look at Europe, it's even worse. The British have become lapdogs of the British military, become just lapdogs of the Americans. The European militaries, with a few honorable exceptions, have atrophied. And as a result, the Europeans governments have no independent foreign policy, because you can't have an independent foreign policy without your own military. If you're dependent on the Americans to provide your defense, then the Americans are going to call the shots. And your government is going to be just a, kind of a Finlandized, lapdog of the Americans. And that's true. So I welcome, if the Poles and the Romanians and the Serbians and a few others can build up their militaries to the, proper levels, which would give them an independent, autonomous voice in foreign policy, then they could stand up to the Americans. They could tell the Americans when they're being foolish, which is what junior partners in the coalition. So the British traditionally did. The British traditionally, when they were still had some authority, some military power, even when it was waning back in the 50s, Macmillan, he would tell Eisenhower when he was being foolish. And that's what the British did. If the Americans were becoming, carried away with their own power, the British would step in and say, well, look, you can't do this. Well, the British will stop doing that. They become, servile lapdogs. And maybe I'd like to see that maybe the Hungarians and Poles, the Romanians might step in at some point. The Serbians, maybe, who knows? But, this is just one more consequence of this.
Yeah, men need to return to arms in all kinds of ways to be able to reclaim the territory that's been lost. You've given us lots to think about today. Thanks so much for the really insightful answers, and we've covered a lot of ground. A lot of what you said has reminded me of a remark that Engels made a few months after the death of Marx. He said, "It is a peculiar fact that with every great revolutionary movement, the question of free love comes to the foreground." And from what you said today, we can see that if there's going to be any kind of effective counter-revolution, it means attacking the revolution in that area specifically.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I've enjoyed talking. Good question.
So people are going to be wondering when this new book is coming out, what it's called, and when they might be able to get hold of it.
Well, I think I have a publisher. They're taking a little time. They promised to bring it out quickly. I'm hoping it'll be out soon because it's obviously timely. I'm going to call it, Why Did It Happen? Why did it happen? Why America went communist or woke or far left? I don't know what I want to call it, but why the left took control of the United States?
Great. That's the question on the minds of many people, and not many people are giving the answers that you are, but I think your answers are the correct ones. So it's been great to speak to you, and I'm looking forward to the release of the new book. In the meantime, people who are interested in your views on the real root of the sexual revolution and its consequences can have a look at your book, The New Politics of Sex. And I'll release this interview with some highlights from that book, because I think that one has been unjustly overlooked and is one of the most important ones you've written.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome, Stephen. Nice to speak to you. Take care.
God bless.
If you like this and don't want to become a degenerate, subscribe now.